Hi, welcome to Sociological Lens. I am Dr. Dilsora Fozilova. In today's lecture, we are going to talk about postmodernism, one of the most influential and at times perplexing movements in social theory, art, literature, and philosophy. Postmodernism challenges many of the assumptions and grand narratives that have defined modern world, from our understanding of truth and knowledge to the very structure of society itself. But what exactly is postmodernism? At its core, postmodernism is a critical reaction to the ideas and values of modernism, the intellectual movement that dominated from the late 19th century into much of the 20th century. Modernism was built on the ideas of progress, reason, science, and universal truth. It sought to explain the world through structured, overarching narratives, or what we often call meta-narratives. Big stories like the triumph of science over superstition, or the inevitability of social progress. Postmodernism, however, emerged in the mid 20th century as a response to the perceived limitations of modern thought. Instead of grand narratives, postmodernism emphasizes fragmentation, plurality, and relativity. It questions the very possibility of objective truth or universal meaning. For postmodernist thinkers, what we consider truth is often shaped by power structures, historical contexts, and cultural perspectives. A postmodern approach argues that reality is constructed, not discovered, like social reality is constructed, not discovered. Our understanding of the world is mediated through language, media, and culture, making it inherently subjective. That the modernity's argument of objectivity is undermined by postmodern perspective. This is why postmodernism is often associated with skepticism towards ideas of like progress, objective knowledge, and the power of institutions to define reality. So let's think of a few key features of postmodernism. One of them is relativism. Postmodernism challenges the idea that there is one correct way of understanding the world. Instead, it argues that multiple perspectives are equally valid depending on one's context and experience. Deconstruction, on the other hand, is another very powerful aspect of postmodernism. One of the key techniques of postmodern thinkers like Jacques Derrida is to deconstruct texts, institutions, and ideas. This involves unraveling their underlying assumptions in power dynamics, exposing the contradictions and complexity within them. Hyperreality and simulacra, philosopher Jean Baudrillard proposed that in the postmodern age, the distinction between reality and representations of reality blurs. What we see in media or even experience in our daily lives may be a stimulation, a representation that has replaced the reality it was meant to depict. So postmodernism also had a profound influence on culture, from art and literature to architecture and film. It embraces irony and playfulness, often rejecting traditional forms of genres. Think about films like disrupt linear narratives or artworks that mix styles from different eras. These are clear examples of postmodern sensibilities. Postmodernism invites us to question everything, especially those things we take for granted. It asks us to challenge dominant ideologies, think critically about how knowledge is produced and embrace complexity rather than seek simple solutions. But of course, postmodernism also has its critics, and most of the time, it's there are a lot of critics, and there's laughter towards postmodernism as well. Some argue that it leads to relativism so extreme that it undermines the possibility of shared values or collective action. Others claim that by dismantling the notion of truth, it leaves us without a stable foundation on which to address social issues or injustices. As we explore postmodernism in a greater detail, keep in mind both its radical potential to challenge entrenched ideas and its possibility of limitations. It is a theory that encourages us to think differently, to encourage the power of narratives, and to be skeptical on those who claim to have all the answers. Okay, with this, I will just share my PowerPoint, and we will just get into a little bit details of main arguments and the main contributions and other stuff. Here I have example of postmodernist art here. You can see shapes of forces here, abstract drawing, and in some cases like a Victorian or even more, that the flowery stuff used from that. So this is kind of like, I need the specials to explain me this. However, this it makes me wonder about the art and literature of postmodernist thought. So postmodernism is a broad and complex intellectual movement that emerged in the mid-20th century, challenging the assumptions of modernism, particularly in art, culture, philosophy, and critical theory. It is often characterized by skepticism towards grand narratives, overarching stories, or explanations that claim to offer universal truth. A focus on relativism in a questioning of established structures of power, knowledge, and identity. And unlike modernism, which generally believed in the power of science, technology, and rationality to improve society, postmodernism is more skeptical of these ideas. So one of the main key characteristics of postmodernism is the rejection of grand theories. Postmodernism rejects the idea of grand narratives such as progress, nationality, rationality, or objective truth, which were central to modernist thinking. Modernism believed in universal truths that applied across time and space, like the belief in science and reason leading to human progress. Postmodernists, on the other hand, argue that these narratives are socially constructed and often serve the interests of particular groups, not everybody, masking the complexities of human experience. It also, postmodernism offers a critical thought or overarching explanations for how the world works, such as ideologies based on progress, religion, or science, that it emphasized the idea that knowledge and truth are fragmented and subjective. The relativism is another main part of postmodernism. Postmodernism promotes the idea that truth is not objective or absolute, but it rather relative and dependent on individual or individual or cultural perspectives. This means that what is considered true or real varies based on context, background, and power structures. As a result, postmodernists often critique the idea of a single authoritative viewpoint. It challenges the concept of objective truth, asserting what we consider truth is shaped by language, culture, and power structures. Truth, according to postmodernists, is often a social construct rather than a universal fact. Focus on language and symbols. Postmodernism pays close attention to how languages shape our reality. Now, again, you can see that it does not believe in the grand narratives. It believes that language shapes reality, it changes reality. Since meaning is seen as fluid and subjective, postmodern thinkers argue that no single interpretation of text, event, or phenomena is definitive. And also, deconstruction is a very important part of postmodernism. It's a key method associated with it. Deconstruction involves critically examining texts, ideas, or cultural practices to reveal hidden assumptions or contradictions. Developed by philosopher Jacques Derrida, deconstruction suggests that meaning is always unstable and that texts contain multiple, often conflicting interpretations. And we can see that when we look at religious scriptures, for example, Islam is interpreted in so many ways, from the most peaceful and the best religion to most violent or terroristic way of understanding Islamic narratives. So that you can see there is Derrida's point of the texts can be interpreted in many different ways. So this is a method used by postmodernists to analyze texts and cultural products. Deconstruction involves unpacking and questioning the assumptions, binaries, and hierarchies that underlie traditional interpretations, revealing their instability. The other one is plurality and diversity. Postmodernism embraces the multiplicity of perspectives and voices, particularly those that have been marginalized in traditional narratives such as minorities, women, and non-Western cultures. It values diversity over uniformity and linear progress. And also, postmodernist thinkers like Michel Foucault emphasizes how power and knowledge are intertwined. Power and knowledge are intertwined, arguing that what is considered truth is often a product of dominant power structures. Foucault's concept of discourse, for example, refers to the way language and ideas shape our understanding of the world and how certain discourses become dominant while others are marginalized. Also, playfulness and plurality, playfulness and irony, or the fragmentation and playfulness is very important parts of postmodernist thought. In art, literature, and architecture, postmodernism is characterized by fragmentation, passage, a mix of styles and genres, irony, and playfulness. Rather than adhering to strict rules or forms, postmodernist works often blur boundaries between high and low culture, mixing different influences and genres in self-referential and playful way. For example, postmodern architecture may incorporate a mix of historical styles without a concern for coherence. And postmodernism often uses irony, parody, and playfulness to critique series of established ideas. It tends to blur the boundaries between high-low cultures, mixing elements of all of them. So that is basically what is postmodernism about. So where do we see postmodernism in practice? We see in different areas, as we mentioned in the beginning. It can be in literature, art and architecture, sociology, and cultural studies. Postmodernism challenges traditional concept of identity, meaning, and reality, which is philosophical. Thinkers like Jean Franco's Lyotard, which is very important figure in postmodernism, and Foucault critique the structures of authority and knowledge that claim to represent universal truth. In art and architecture, on the other hand, postmodern works often reject the clean lines, functionalism, and minimalist designs of modernism. Instead, they embrace eclectic styles, irony, and reference to history and popular culture. In literature, postmodern view often employs techniques such as metafiction, stories that comment on the art of storytelling, and intertextuality, drawing on other texts, and may question the role of author or narrator. In literature, postmodern authors like Thomas Pynchon or Don DeLillo often write fragmented, self-referential and playful narratives that question the nature of reality in truth. If you want to take a look in the art and architecture, I have some examples here. Postmodern art and architecture break away from the strict forms and functionalism of modernism. Artists like Andy Warhol blurred the lines between commercial and fine art, while architects like Frank Gehry use eclectic and sometimes absurd designs. In sociology and cultural studies, we believe this postmodernism examines how social constructs like gender, race, and class are shaped by power dynamics. It's not given to us, but it is constructed through power relations in society, historical relations. It challenges the idea that these categories are fixed and inherently meaningful. So let's take a look at some of the main contributions to postmodernist thought. I always have a difficulty pronouncing names of these people from different cultures. So Jean Franco's Lyotard is one of the very known figures in postmodernist thought. And Lyotard basically was in the development of postmodernism, especially through his ideas on knowledge and truth in modern world. His most influential contribution is found in his 1979 work, The Postmodern Condition, a report on knowledge, where he introduces the concept of incredulity towards grand narratives. Here is some of the stuff from his work. The main idea in his work was that incredulity towards grand narratives. Lyotard in this work argued that postmodern era, people have become skeptical of grand narratives, also called meta-narratives. These are big overarching stories or explanations that claim to offer universal truths, such as the idea that history is progressing towards a better future, or that science and reason will solve all the human problems. He believed that these narratives were used to justify power and control, and that they oversimplify the complexity of a human experience. For example, the grand narrative of progress suggests that society is always improving through science and technology. Lyotard criticizes this idea, pointing out that not everyone benefits equally from these changes, and that progress can also lead to negative consequences, which we see every day in our lives, like environmental destruction or social inequality. And another idea of Lyotard's was the knowledge in postmodernism. Lyotard explored how knowledge is changing in the postmodern world, particularly with the rise of technology and digital information. He suggested that knowledge is no longer seen as something that serves universal truths, but rather as something that is fragmented, local, and used for specific purposes. In other words, knowledge is now more about practical use, what works in certain contexts, than about discovering universal laws and truths. For example, in a postmodern society, scientific knowledge might be valued more for its ability to solve specific problems, like creating new technology, than for its ability to explain fundamental nature of reality. Instead of grand, all-encompassing stories, Lyotard promoted the idea of little narratives. These are smaller, local stories or explanations that apply to particular groups or contexts. Little narratives acknowledge that the diversity of human experiences and don't try to impose one single truth on everyone. For instance, instead of trying to explain all of history with one big idea like progress, we could look at specific historical processes or histories of different communities, cultures, and individuals. Each story has value in its own context without needing to be part of a universal framework. Lyotard also examines how science and technology impact the way knowledge is produced and used in the postmodern era. He pointed out that scientific knowledge is now more about efficiency, data, and control rather than discovering deep truths. He also suggested that technology, specifically computers and information systems, has changed how we think about knowledge, as it becomes more about managing and processing information than understanding the world. In summary, Lyotard contributed to postmodernism in very few ways, the numerous ways. Lyotard argued that postmodernism challenges the idea of universal truth or overarching stories, emphasizing that they often serve power structures, include diverse experiences, and of course, the little narratives instead of big narratives. He promoted the idea of small, localized stories that better reflect the complexity of diversity on human life. Another one is very important one is in the modern world, knowledge is no longer about big universal ideas, but is instead practical, local, and often tied to technology. That's the main thing is about Lyotard's contribution to postmodernist thought. Michel Foucault is one of my favorite scholars who also hugely contributed to postmodernism. His contribution to postmodernism lies in his exploration of power, knowledge, and discourse, challenging traditional ideas about truth and authority. His work focuses on how societies control and define people through structures of power and knowledge. Foucault argues that power and knowledge are closely connected. He didn't see power as something only held by governments or rulers. Instead, he believed that power is spread through society and exercised through everyday practices, institutions, and systems of knowledge. In Foucault's view, knowledge is not neutral or objective. It is shaped by power. What we consider to be truth or knowledge is determined by those in power, and it is used to maintain and reinforce their authority. For example, in medical or educational or legal systems, certain ways of thinking are promoted as truth because they serve the interests of dominant groups. Another main contribution of Foucault to postmodernism is discourse and power. Foucault introduced the concept of discourse, which refers to the way of language, ideas, and practices shape our understanding of the world. Discourses define what can be said, thought, or considered as true within a particular context, and they are tools through which power is exercised. For instance, the discourse around mental illness I teach in many of my sociology classes changes over time. What is considered normal or abnormal behavior is shaped by the dominant medical or social ideas of the time. In the past, certain behaviors were labeled as mental disorders because they didn't fit social norms, and these labels give power to institutions like psychiatry to control and threat individuals. Those individuals who labeled as mentally ill did not have any power for example, political power, voting power. Their senses are considered to be invalid. They didn't have they didn't have a choice to decide their own medical procedures. That they didn't have basic thought or mental normality to decide what is good for them. Foucault also introduced the idea of biopower, a form of power that focuses on controlling populations and managing life. Modern societies, Foucault argued, exert control not just through laws or force, but by regulating people's bodies, health, and behavior. This type of power is more subtle but deeply ingrained in social institutions such as healthcare, education, and the military. He also examined disciplinary power, which refers to the ways individuals are trained, monitored, and controlled through institutions like schools, prisons, and hospitals. This type of power is not overtly oppressive, but works by shaping behavior and norms through surveillance and normalization. Foucault famously used the metaphor of the panopticon. It's coming from Bentham, a prison design that allows guards to observe inmates without inmates knowing when they are being watched, to explain how modern society disciplines people by making them internalize surveillance and control. And another important concept of Foucault is that the archaeology and genealogy of knowledge. Foucault developed methods he called archaeology and genealogy to study how knowledge and power have changed over time. Archaeology looks at the history of ideas and how different periods of history have different ways of thinking, while genealogy focuses on the historical development of power or power relations and how they shape knowledge. And one of his books, I think it's about the madness and Civilization. I really enjoyed that book. He uses that genealogy of knowledge to explain how this progressed over time. Um, for example, another example, Focus explores the changing nature of punishment in his book, Discipline and Punish. I'll have another video on Discipline and Punish very soon, so you can watch it in the channel. He showed how punishment shifted from physical torture, public executions to that was in the past, and then to more subtle forms of control like imprisonment in modern times. This shift reflects changes in how societies exercise power and control behavior. If we want to talk a couple more, there is he has so many different concepts that can be a great example of postmodernism. Critique of truth is another powerful part of Foucault's writing. Foucault questioned the idea that there is a single objective truth. Instead, he argued that what we consider truth is always influenced by power relations and societal structures. We can watch now Trump pushing his candidacy for presidency in the United States, and the arguments he has, or some of the stuff he comes out and says, is far from truth, but the truth he is creating, and half of the nation is believing in them. So this is the great example of what Foucault tried to say here. Different periods and cultures have different regimes of truth, he says, or ways of defining and enforcing what counts as true. Foucault's work encourages us to be critical of those who claim to have ultimate truth, as these claims often mask underlying power dynamics. For instance, in the field of sexuality, Foucault showed how modern society construct norms around what is considered normal or deviant sexuality. These norms are not natural, but are products of historical and social processes shaped by power. And lastly, I would also mention that Foucault's resistance to power is also very important to understand postmodernism. While Foucault explored how power controls people, he also believed that power is never absolute. There is always room for resistance, and where there is power, there is individuals or groups who challenge or subvert it. He argues that resistance could take many forms, from small acts of defiance to larger social movements that question dominant discourses or structures of power. Jacques Derrida is another main contributors of postmodernism. His concept of deconstruction is key contribution to postmodernism, challenging the ways we understand language, meaning, and interpretation. Deconstruction is not about destroying texts or ideas, but rather about revealing their internal contradictions and questioning the stability of meaning. Meaning is unstable for Derrida. He argues that meaning is not fixed or stable, but always shifting. Words and concepts do not have a single clear meaning because their meaning depends on their relationship to other words and ideas. This challenges the traditional idea that language can perfectly represent reality. In other words, meaning is always deferred or delayed as we try to define one word by using other words which themselves need defining. Western philosophy often relies on binary oppositions like good, evil, reason, emotion, or speech writing, where one term is privileged over the other. Derrida showed that these oppositions are not natural or obsolete. They are socially constructed, and the inferior term often carries hidden significance. Deconstruction reveals how these binaries are unstable and how meaning often depends on the suppressed or marginalized terms. Derrida critiqued the logocentrism, the idea that there is a central fixed meaning or truth like the word or reason that grounds all other meanings. Deconstruction shows that there is no ultimate reference point or foundational truth, only shifting relationships between science. So Derrida's deconstruction has deeply influenced postmodernism, especially in how we think about interpretation, language, and the limits of knowledge. Frederick Jameson is another postmodernist thinker. He is a significant figure in this theory, particularly known for his analysis of culture, capitalism, and the effects of postmodernity. Um, his contributions are the postmodernism as a cultural logic of late capitalism and pastiche and parody and depthlessness and the loss of historical context. He talks about political engagement. Jameson emphasizes the role of pastiche in postmodern culture, where different styles and genres are mixed together without a sense of original intent or authenticity. Um, Unlike parody, which has a critical age, pastiche is more about the celebration of styles from the past without any serious critic. This blending of styles reflect a cultural landscape where originality is difficult to achieve and where everything becomes commodity. Jameson argues that postmodern culture is characterized by depthlessness, where the surface of things like images and commodities become more important than underlying meanings or historical contexts. In this sense, postmodernism tends to favor superficial experiences and instant gratification over deeper, more reflexive engagement with culture and history. Despite his often critical view of postmodern culture, Jameson maintains that art and culture can still serve a political purpose. He argues for the need to reconnect cultural production with historical materialism and to recognize the potential for political critique within postmodern forms. Jameson's work has been influential in understanding the relationship between culture and capitalism in the postmodern era, providing critical insight into how economic conditions shape artistic and cultural expressions. Also, Judith Butler contributed to postmodernism, that her gender trouble. She argued that gender is not an innate quality, but a performance shaped by societal norms. Gender for modernism was just a hard reality, but for postmodernism, it is just shaped by societal norms. Her work deconstructs the categories of male and female, showing how they are socially constructed and maintained through repeated performances. And also Bauman talks about liquid modernity. Bauman described postmodern society as being in a state of liquid modernity. Liquid modernity is one of the famous concepts in postmodern scholarship. where social structures, relationships, and identities are in constant flux, unlike the more solid and stable institutions of modernity. More solid and stable institutions of modernity was part of modernity, right? So then in postmodernism, they are liquid, they are changing, they are blurring, they are kind of mixing very easily. They are not solid anymore. He analyzes the uncertainty and insecurity of life in postmodern times. Bauman's work provides a sociological perspective on postmodernism, emphasizing the changing nature of identity and community in contemporary work. In summary, postmodernism is a complex and multifaceted movement that emerged in mid 20th century, as we mentioned in the beginning, as a response to modernism and the cultural, social, and political changes of the time. It is characterized by skepticism towards grand narratives and absolute truth. It does not offer what to do, but it just kind of challenges the ideas, emphasizing the fragmentation and multiplicity of meaning in human experience. Key features of postmodernism include relativism, the belief that knowledge and truth are not objective but are socially constructed and context dependent. Deconstruction, a method developed by Derrida that reveals the instability of meaning in language and challenges binary oppositions, and the power and discourse. Michel Foucault's exploration of how power is exercised through knowledge and societal institutions, shaping our understanding of truth and reality. Cultural reflection of late capitalism, the notion that postmodernism reflects the economic conditions of late capitalism characterized by consumerism and commodification. While postmodernism has been quite influential, and I really enjoy postmodernist texts like Foucault, Derrida, they're just amazing. It has also faced significant criticism for its perceived relativism and skepticism, for not offering solid idea about, if not modernism, what. Some argue that its rejection of objective truth and its focus on deconstruction can lead to cynicism or a lack of commitment to social justice, as it can make it difficult to argue for any form of concrete action or moral standpoint. In conclusion, postmodernism offers a critical framework for understanding contemporary culture and society, challenging established norms and encouraging a diverse range of voices and perspectives. It invites us to engage with the complexities of modern life, recognizing the fluidity of identity, meaning, and power dynamics in a rapidly changing world. So this is our short video on postmodernism. Email me your ideas, and if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer. I'll see you in our next video. Bye.